Okay, good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing? You know how I like to start these sessions, right? We need to let people know we're about to start. So I want a big round of applause that everyone can hear. You know, I rarely just do that so that I can come up here every hour and get clapped because, you know, my ego needs whatever help it can get. Anyway, seriously. We have an action-packed day here at the old fire station, and it is continuing. So many of you, I know, are here for the Big Ideas panel, The Politics of Home. But before that, we've got a little surprise, a little interlude before we get into the start of the panel. So if you've been here all day, you'll know that earlier this afternoon, the Bocas Youth Debate happened here in this room. And the two teams of youth debaters were so brilliant and so evenly matched that the judges needed some time to figure out who won. So while the last event was going on, the judges have been deliberating, and now they're going to tell us who the winners were, or the winners are, or will be, and then they're going to receive their trophies. So this is what's going to happen. I am going to welcome up on stage Sarah Inglefield on behalf of the judges. She will tell us what they have decided, and then Marina Salandi Brown, President of the Bocas Lit Fest, and Jean-Claude Cournant, CEO of the Bocas Lit Fest, will actually present the winners with their trophies. So let's welcome Sarah and thank the judges with some applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the organizers of Bocas Lit Fest for having all of us as judges here today. And of course, I want to commend both teams for their participation and arguments. Sure. First of all, I want to ask my two judges, would you like to come up and have a brief conversation about the debate, or you're happy for me to go ahead? Go ahead. So with that in mind, I want to remind everyone that we don't shoot the messenger. And I want to really honestly just comment on the fact that, as was previously stated, both teams were incredibly well-spoken. After this session, I want to take all of your numbers and I want to get public speaking training from each and every one of you, because I do this for a job and I don't speak as articulately as you do. So again, congratulations on your ability to stand up and present your arguments in such a professional and articulate way. I think that is a life skill, professional skill, that is going to bode well for you in your future life and careers. As far as the arguments are concerned, well, boy, I was pinging like a yo-yo, backwards and forwards. Didn't know where to, where we were going to land with this, because both sides had very, very compelling arguments. I will say, though, that one of the teams came out as champion, and the reason for that is that we felt the team was very clear with their objective. They were able to present their argument in very succinct, clear points and kept repeating the same points throughout the debate. And the conclusion was also a very succinct and clear conclusion. And it left us really understanding the position that we are in here in Trinidad and Tobago and the challenges and opportunities for our youth. So again, I thank our debaters for both arguments, and the team we have chosen is Team Against. Team B are our champions of the Bocas Lit Fest Youth Debate 2025.
And I invite the other judges, as well as Ms. Marina Salandi Brown and Jean-Claude Cournant, the CEO of Bocas Lit Fest, to present the awards to the winning team. Let's have a round of applause. in the meantime, we do have another announcement, which is the crowd favorite vote, before we also present the second place trophies. You can get your photo ops. Okay, lovely. So again, we want to thank all the debaters for their hard work and everything that they put into this debate. Right, so the crowd favorite vote. Up on the stage. Okay, we will be having a bit more suspense for the crowd favorite vote. They would like to do a winner's picture as well with the BOCUS representatives, the founder, as well as the CEO.
Yeah. We can just small up.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations, team, for your success. Now we'll present the People's Choice to Ms. Keziah Joseph. Congratulations. Yeah. Now, before we move on, I would like to invite Marina Salandi Brown and Mr. Jean-Claude Cunard to present the second place trophies, and then we will close off for the afternoon. Once again, thank you to our judges, Berkeley Wendell Semple, Sarah Inglefield, and Lawrence R. June. I'd like to welcome our program and festival director, Nicholas Laughlin, to introduce the next event. Thank you all for coming, and congratulations.
Okay, I hope our youth debaters, I'm sure they do, are very aware that we're across the street from the Red House, which is probably the one place in the country where we need to raise the level of debate. And I don't know their ages, I'm not sure if they're even all old enough to vote, but it's good to know that we have a brilliant, well-spoken, thoughtful, generation of debaters able to handle the big questions, the big ideas facing Trinidad and Tobago. Maybe some of them will be over across the street in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, let's see. All right, we're now about to start the event that I'm here for, which is our Big Ideas panel. So a couple of quick things before we bring the panelists up on stage. Those of you who are looking at the printed program or who have been looking at the festival program online for the last few weeks might have noticed that the lineup of this panel has changed a couple of times. And in fact, the lineup of speakers this afternoon is not going to quite be what's in the program. You know, the truth is, the caliber of people who we need for a conversation like this are the ones most likely to be called away on pressing business to solve the problems of the world. but we are very lucky that, you know, in addition to the ones who are unavoidably called away, we've got 3 brilliant experts in different fields this afternoon. The person who is not a brilliant expert in any field except running a literature festival is me. I'm going to be a host. So my name is not in the program, but I'm going to do my best to have a scintillating conversation with these 3 people. So I want to invite them up on stage now, and then I'll introduce them very briefly, and we'll get the conversation started. So please, panel. Here we go. So let me start by introducing the 3 people next to me. And I'll start at the far end. And oddly enough, they're sitting in alphabetical order, which is very convenient. So at the far end of the stage is Roberta Clark. And by the way, these people all have very long, impressive CVs. So you're getting the very succinct version of their bio, right? Because I don't want to take up the whole hour telling you about all the stuff that they've done. At the far end of the stage for me is Roberta Clark, who is currently a commissioner for the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which is an organ of the Organization of American States, very well known in the field of human rights. Roberta has roots in Dominica and Barbados, but currently lives in Trinidad. I'm telling you that because we actually have quite a regional panel up here on stage, and I think that's important to know where everyone is from and where everyone is grounded. So Roberta Clark, I'm particularly grateful, Roberta, because you joined this panel on just a few days' notice. We are lucky to have you. We're lucky you're even in the country. So thank you for being here with us. Next to Roberta in the middle is Richard Lynch, who is a retired military officer. Behave yourselves. He's also the former director of international affairs at the Ministry of National Security, and he's basically a policy and strategy consultant working on security issues, international security issues. And next to Richard Lynch and next to me is Kellie Magnus. Kellie has done various things throughout her career. She's currently the executive director of the Caribbean Culture Fund. She's worked in the field of publishing for many years, various aspects of the arts. She's a writer herself. And I do want to say it is not irrelevant to this panel. Kellie is a writer herself, and she was recently shortlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize from the Caribbean region. And I think that deserves some applause. It is reassuring for those of us, you know, like me, those of us working at arts NGOs, it's reassuring for me anyway to know that you can still do the very demanding job of running a culture NGO and still find time to write and write well, apparently. So Kellie needs to give me some lessons. So let me give you a bit of background. The panel is called The Politics of Home. Why is it called that? Well, I think by now you all know that the festival theme this year is always coming home. And so many of the events in the program some way linked to this theme and the idea of home, homecoming, how you define home, belonging. And these are questions that are not just literary questions. Yes, our writers write about them. They write about family, about identity, all of that. But these are very practical, political, you know, pragmatic questions we all face every day. You know, at a government level, it's a question in policy making. At the level of citizens, it affects what we can do, where we can do it, who we can do it with, what we get put in prison for. So home is not at all a simple idea. Home is sometimes more of a question than an assertion. And just to say that, as some of you know, if you've bought a festival guide, you may have seen printed right to the front of the guide the poem by Richard Georges that line, "Always Coming Home," comes from. And don't read it now, because I want you to pay attention to us, but read it later, because that poem is actually quite an ambivalent poem, in the sense that it gives us questions as much as assurances. So home is not necessarily something to be, very straightforwardly celebrated in Richard's poem. It's something to be worried about, to question, to try to figure out where it is. And it takes in place, physical geography, it takes in history, it takes in a bit of nature, family, ancestry, a little touch of the cosmic and the spiritual. And that is all relevant to this kind of discussion we're having now. There are a couple of lines near the center of the poem that I want to read for you, just because I think they're also very relevant to this discussion. In the middle of the poem, Richard writes, "I am completely convinced that we are the last creatures to discover how to be in the world." And I think, in a very practical way, how to be in the world is a succinct summary of what we're going to talk about this afternoon. But I want to start, before we get into the many kind of technical and sort of policy questions that we could address, I want to talk just about home. And I want to ask each of you to tell us, very simply, what home means to you. I think home is an image as much as an idea or a place, something that we imagine. So I just want you to say, when you think of home, what or where or even who does your mind instinctively go to? Roberta?
Thank you very much, Nicholas. I just want to also give greetings to everyone here, and also to congratulate Bocas on your 15th anniversary. When Marina called me, there's no way you can really say no to Marina. The contributions that she has made, and you, Nicholas, and all of the Bocas team to the Caribbean culture, I think to say no to a request to involve was not an option for me. So happy to be here. On Team B, Nicholas.
No.
Yeah. No, I'm joking. So what does home mean to me? I want to answer the question through the prism of place and geography, but I think it's also connected to metaphor, I suppose, and ideas. But a home for me is a place where I think you can feel at home and then you can be at home. And feeling at home may be something that's comfortable, a bit of a transition, but being at home is about groundedness and rootedness. And so for me, being at home is about belonging, being connected. And when I say connected, connected to place, connected to the people and the community, importantly connected to the culture, connected to the history, and connected to the aspirations of the people in that place. You are part of that. And of course it is being secure and accepted. If you're not accepted, can you really be at home? And so for me, all of that, when you ask me where I belong, if someone in the Caribbean asks me where I belong, I will give them the details that you've just said there, right? But if someone from outside the Caribbean asks me where I'm from, I'm going to say I'm from the Caribbean, because it is as in the wonderful song that the festival is referencing, we come across the water and we've been through the fire. And that is all of the Caribbean. And I especially, of course, connect to the English-speaking Caribbean, because language is a thing that connects you more closely, or it can distance you if you don't understand what's going around you. So for me, Caribbean is home because of that shared history and that shared aspiration. The other thing I want to say before I pass on is that I think being home is not a passive thing. In other words, other people don't make you feel at home. Yes, they do, but you also have to make yourself be at home and also make others be at home. So if you're not doing that, if you're not contributing, if you're not engaging in the place that you are you really claiming the space as your own and making your contribution? And I think in the Caribbean we have a long history of people not feeling at home because of inequalities, compounded inequalities, discrimination, exclusion, people having to leave, but always with the idea that this place belongs to them and they can come back to it. The question for us now in this space, how do we all engage with the place so that we keep people here, So they don't have to run away for opportunity and run away for belonging because they belong here and there are things here. They have access to their rights, they have access to development. So yeah, to me it's a reciprocal responsibility, claiming home and being at home.
Yes, and you took up the theme of the youth debate, which was precisely, do young people need to leave to be able to make the lives they want, or can they do that here? And I think something interesting you said there is, what you really said is that sometimes home is a decision you have to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something you have to make, a decision you have to make for yourself. Richard, you close your eyes and I say the word home. What is the thing that comes to mind?
Well, for me, I think home is foundation, a place that at the end of the day best defines my launching pad as to who I see myself being and who I see myself growing up from to make my contribution to society. So home is dual for me. It's foundational, but it is also a reference point to evolution, a sense of who am I becoming. So it's a place that I always go back to be able to contextualize my own growth and development. So it's not always a geographical place in the context that it was when I was there. And I'm saying that because home for me starts with the context within which my parents set the conditions for me to begin to discover who I am. All right, so for me, that still resonates with me because a sense of intergenerationality is an important part of how I define home. Yeah. So that I contextualize home within the context of not just the conditions that my parents set for me to be born and raised in, but also the responsibility of their sacrifice towards setting those conditions. And so part of home for me is the evolution of how I assume the responsibility to be a home for those who I am responsible for. So home for me is a kind of a verb more than a noun, right? And, yeah.
Process. Kelly, what is the home you're always coming to?
No,
And
I mean, I think
no pressure now that we know you're a prize-winning
As
writer. but
both Roberta and Richard have said, home is a plural concept, right? And I like the way you framed it. It's both it's a question and a decision, or it's a mission, kind of a mandate. So for me, home is layers. At the simplest level, home is where my mother is. Wherever my mother is, that is where my life is anchored. And then at another level, it's a collection of the experiences that are most frequent and closest to me and the ones that I hold the most dear. But I recognize that for me, that definition reflects a place of privilege, and home in this region is a contested concept. And so in my writing and in my work, I kind of lean to home, the mission, which is try to make the things that I like about being home accessible to as many others as possible.
yes. Having asked you this, I think it's maybe only fair for me to volunteer my own answer. I mean, I agree with, in different ways, with everything you've all said, but listening to you, and especially what you say, Kelly, about home being where your mother is, I think when I really think about it, I think home is where the people I most care about are, but home is also what I'm most worried about, or what I'm most afraid about for them. In the sense of, I think home is where my family, my siblings, my niece and nephews are. If it was not Trinidad and somewhere else, that would be home. But the place, the context that maybe I'm fearful for the future is where they might be, and if something happened to them. And Roberta, you said something about home as being connected to the idea of safety, security, the place where you can feel a certain sense of security. And I think I want to talk about that a little bit because, yes, I think one of the first things you might think is, yes, home is where I'm safe. Home is where I belong. Home is where I'm safe. But that's not the case for everyone. Home can be a risky place, a dangerous or violent place. There are people who don't have a home. In the Caribbean, certainly, a home can be a dangerous place for women, for children, for LGBTQI citizens, for others. And in my conversations with you, something that you said very clearly is that human rights, the field that you currently are most engaged in, as an idea, as a concept, but as a practical process, is essentially about safety. So tell us a little bit about that.
I suppose you can think of security in many different ways. Security can be in a place where you have love and care, as where you're with your mother, or if you're lucky to be in a situation where your family is all around you. In fact, Caribbean people are migrants. So a lot of us are living in a place where we don't have that many people around us because we are, they're everywhere. But it certainly is, home could be, yes, in that space, that virtual space where you're experiencing love and you're experiencing kindness and you're accessing care. Someone cares about you, you care about them. So there's that kind of emotional security. But I think the thing about security is there's a physical security issue in the Caribbean, there's the economic security, and there's a social security issue. And the reality is that we have been independent now for quite a long time, but we did inherit a situation where so many were excluded. So many lived in poverty, so many had no access to credit, to land, to productive resources, and many were forced to leave. And we are still in a situation where many are forced to leave. We keep hearing about barrel children who are their families, their parents, they leave, they send them to try and give them material security, but the kind of 360-degree security that families need are not there. People are forced to leave to get that economic security. So I would say we are in a region where we've found it very hard to keep our people there as they seek that economic security, as they seek opportunities, as they seek livelihood. So that's one thing that we have to think about. How do we, and I think you said as part of the youth debate, how do we generate the conditions that people stay here because there's something that they can contribute to and they can be rewarded for it, and their opportunities. Where we are dealing with the inequalities that's still the legacy of this region, the compounded inequalities, so there's that. There's the inequalities that come through discrimination, and many people leave because they just can't feel safe because they're stigmatized and they're discriminated against. And the laws are not changing. We saw recently in relation to Trinidad and Tobago, for legal technical reasons where the Jason Jones appeal was not upheld. I mean, that's when we go to Privy Council, we can talk a little bit more about that. But the fact is, if you are here in this Trinidad and Tobago, that criminalization is your life. And there's no point saying, but no one is really being arrested. That's not the point. The point is the law exists, and the law is a discriminatory law, and it violates privacy, it violates personal autonomy. And across the Caribbean, we have had to deal with that. Do people who are discriminated on the basis of gender identity and sex orientation, do they really feel at home in the way that heterosexual people, I'm sure they don't. They make it their home. They create the conditions for family and community and care, but it's not quite the same. So we do have to think about discrimination and lack of access to justice as undermining the sense of the security which we associate with home. And before I pass on, because I work so much in, for those of you who know that, I work so much in gender-based violence. The home is, ironically, the physical home, the familial home, is almost the most dangerous place for women all across the Caribbean. So that's also something that we have to grapple with, thinking about how do we create the conditions, the foundation you're talking about for that security.
Absolutely. And so that's security in one sense, which is personal security, bodily security, physical, emotional security for individuals or for communities. But then there's security in the sense that we have a Ministry of National Security. And that's where you come in, Richard, because that is in fact your field. And when I think, tying back to all of this, when I think about the threats to what I think of as my sense of home, basically it's threats to the security and well-being of my family, my friends, my community. So I don't know that Trinidad is going to get invaded by anyone anytime soon, but things like natural disasters, especially those exacerbated by climate change, possibility of economic decline and collapse leading to social unrest. These are the things I worry about. Is this what my niece and nephews are going to be dealing with in 20 years' time? So as an international and regional security expert, and I imagine you've spent years researching and gaming out various scenarios of this nature, what do you think, if you had to say just one thing, what do you think is the single major threat to Caribbean regional security that our policymakers should be thinking about, but that ordinary citizens should be thinking about and aware of? It is the big ideas panel, so the questions might be big ones.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you said that last, because when I was asked to join this panel, I look at the topic, but I also try to contextualize it within the big ideas. To my mind, one of the mistakes we make, even in our assessment of our own national safety and security, is we tend to look at a country or a society more as a geography than an ideology, right? And I think that it's important for us to start with what is the big idea that is a society or a country, or is the idea big enough? Because what that does, it begins to shape or frame what are those enduring interests and values and principles that is encapsulated in this big idea called this place. And then how do we begin to structure things like the advancement of those enduring interests? How do we defend and or secure it? And that's different for different societies. One would think, for instance, that a country has a constitution. And interestingly enough, yesterday, for the very first time, the Prime Minister of the country used the constitution as a means of swearing in, as opposed to one of the traditional holy texts. And I found that very instructive, and because Britain has no written constitution, but there's a sense of what it is to be British, right? There is an idea that is Singapore, an idea that is China, whether you believe in one China or whatever. You get the sense that there's an idea called Caribbean that we are still trying to define. And it's being defined on the basis of sometimes being a noun when it's really a verb. The extent to which all of those moving parts that you referred to is creating a competition of interests that we have not settled as one big idea, right? And why is that so important? It is important because the question of safety and security, which are two different but complementary aspects of how we operate in a space, more often than not you find out, you discover, for somebody like me who's in the field for 30 years, that the reason that some people are feeling unsafe is predicated on other people's definition of what safety is. And it is institutionalized. So the idea that I cannot walk the streets of Port of Spain without feeling that somebody may accost me with a weapon and I may lose my life is predicated on a definition of what is the role of firearms in this society, and what role does firearms play to protect and or render insecurity to different people in the society. So you have some people saying, well, look, let's arm everybody and we will solve the problem. And others are saying, well, no, let's strengthen our borders to ensure that illegal weapons don't come in the country. So it's a fluid debate. And so the question is, how do we move the societal discussion along to arrive at a big idea of where do arms and ammunition fit into our collective and individual security? And I don't think that sometimes the platforms that are created to move those discussions along are facilitating the progression of a big idea, or at least a big enough idea. And
I like what you say about the Caribbean as a big idea, because, I mean, what is the Caribbean? If we try to, we could spend the next hour trying to define that, right? It's not a geographical fact so much as, what is it? Is it a landscape? You know, we have an incredibly politically complex part of the world that they're independent states, some of which have been independent for 40, 50, 60 years. We've got Haiti, which has been independent for a couple of centuries, but which has faced down continuous threats to its sovereignty over the years. We have islands that are essentially still colonies, you know, associated states, whatever they're called these days. We have French departments, we have Dutch municipalities, all of this, plus we have Guyana, we have Suriname, we have French Guyana, we have Belize, we have parts of the coast of Panama, we have, you know, when you said, if you... Exactly, and that doesn't even get us into the very big Caribbean communities living in Miami and Fort Lauderdale and New York and Toronto and London and all of which. So what is the Caribbean? It's incredibly difficult to define. What strikes me, though, is that, you know, so the Caribbean is a region. We all talk about, you know, regional unity, regional cooperation, or regionalism. Nobody says that's bad. I don't know anyone who would stand up and say Caribbean regionalism is a bad thing. Of course, we think it's a good thing. But what happens when that big idea of the Caribbean as this community, as this neighborhood, comes up against the many small practicalities, the concerns, the objections, the bureaucratic particularities? There's a big idea being attacked in many different directions by small questions and concerns. But I'm thinking, Kelly, that the very notion of the Caribbean as something that's about exchange and cooperation is built into the name of the organization you run. It's the Caribbean Culture Fund, and almost by definition it's there in the name. You are assuming there's something called Caribbean culture,
Correct.
that we should be funding it, and that we should all be working together, that this is, you know, not just an ideal, but a practice. This is what you do every day, right? Mm-hmm. This is what you earn a paycheck from. So from where you sit, working like me in the field of arts and culture, what do you think is both the reality of Caribbean regionalism or Caribbean unity, and what is the prognosis? Where do you see things going? Do you see us, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, 60 odd years after independence, and same as Jamaica, some countries have been independent for less time. Are we growing together, growing apart, or just where we always have been, in a kind of a dance where we're going back and forth?
Well, I can't say I have a prognosis, but I can tell you the challenges that we're seeing. So welcome to my nightmare, right? This is what happens when you accept a job, because you're excited by the idea, but you don't really think through the practicalities, because we are trying to be a regional fund when the region doesn't technically exist. So problem one, how do you move money across 17 different legal jurisdictions without setting off any anti-money laundering flags? Question two, how do you prioritize what you fund when, as you just so well described, there are so many different pockets of Caribbean-ness, all with incredibly urgent needs, all with incredibly creative populations that want to be funded. And so we are in the process of building the boat and rowing the boat at the same time. And all we are able to say is that we don't know. We don't know the answers to this. So what we're trying to do is to just fund subsets of the Caribbean community at a time to allow us to learn what is happening in the creative sector in those communities and to figure out the more practical challenges as we go. One of the very real considerations we have is how do we define Caribbean? What makes you a Caribbean creative? Do you have to be living in the region? Do you have to have been born in the region? If you are a first generation Canadian, but your body of work treats with issues that are germane to the Caribbean, does that make you eligible? And then how do we explain that to other artists from the other sectors who might feel like their needs should take priority? So it's a very contentious set of considerations, but I will say two things. One is the notion of Caribbean regionalism or Caribbean integration, as high concept as it may feel in the region, is very tangible and palpable in the diaspora. It is real, it is cohesive, it is amazing. I think the challenge is how do we make Caribbean people who live here feel that and live it and breathe it in the same way. And the second thing that we're noticing is that even though the hurdles are many and seem insurmountable, there is such a hunger for collaboration across the region and across all those segments of the region that you defined. So for the Culture Fund, what we've decided is that one of our permanent themes will be Caribbean collaboration, because there is as much interest as there is difficulty in bridging those connections across the different sectors in the region.
Yeah.
I want to say something about the big idea around security. When we think of the things that make us insecure, crime and violence, for example, is a big one here in Trinidad and Tobago, but everywhere in the Caribbean we're seeing high levels or increasing levels of crime and violence. But we know it has something to do with education. We know it has something to do with the education system. These young people are coming through a system that is failing them so badly, and then we are wondering why is it they're attracted to informalization, the underground economies, but what are their options? One of the most astounding things to go and look at, and I encourage you to go and look at it, is the CXC results, which are all online. You can get it by subject, you get it by country, you get it by sex of boys and girls. You get a complete breakdown of CXC results for the Caribbean. Last year, the head of CXC informed us, and I wrote it down, that 94%, this is a regional statistic, 94% of students fail to get 5 subjects or more CXC. 94%, all right? Only 5% got 5 passes, which included English and math, foundational topics. So we're investing a lot of money in education sector. A lot of it is the recurrent cost of teachers and building plants, maintenance of plants, but not necessarily investment in education. So we have to think about what does that mean when we are failing children and they have to come out into the world and perform, be productive, be constructive, be citizens, and they are feeling like failures. And I think so the big idea for me in security is education reform. We are still operating on what we inherited in 1960. Instead of calling it O-level, we call it CXC. Instead of calling it A-level, we call it CAPE. But has that reform happened? So to me, it's like digging the hole and burying the money every year and covering the hole and continuing. And we have the same failure year after year. And it's not a small failure. It's a massive, big failure. So what's the big idea here?
Yeah, you see, I fully agree with you. I think part of one of the objectives of educational reform ought to be what is the quality of citizenry we are in pursuit of, right? I've spent a lot of time around reform initiatives on education, but many a times it's driven by essentially an opportunity to supplement a lot of what the institution of the family is no longer providing for children in terms of their upbringing. And then the other side of that is the extent to which industries are in pursuit of a particular type of human capital. So you would see investment in educational reform designed to produce market-driven types of labor and skills. But that's only a part of the big idea when it comes to what is the quality of citizenry we need or want in the region, and what is the intentionality of education to play a role in producing consistently that quality of citizen, that quality of human being. Right? One of the things I last did before I left the Ministry of National Security some time back, I designed what I considered to be the 7 enduring threats to Trinidad and Tobago. Human trafficking, narco-trafficking, trafficking of small arms and light weapons, terrorism, cyber attacks, climate change, and global health pandemics. The interesting thing about all 7 of them is that the generative factors for them do not exist in the region. We do not manufacture guns in the region. We do not manufacture drugs at the levels that is impacting upon us here in the region. We do not manufacture, guns, drugs, and people. The trafficking of people in the region is usually, the source countries are the continental states. When you think about terrorism, we are relatively a zone of peace, only to say that we do have nationals from the region that are still in the conflict zone in Syria and in Iraq. that we have to decide on what is the implications for some young people who were not born in this region, but do have regional citizenry, nationality, that have a right to return to the land of their parents with skill sets in a war zone that we are not familiar with here. We have seen a body of attacks to critical infrastructure like communications, cyber attacks that are not generated from people in the region. We are nowhere close to being responsible for the level of vulnerability that we are experiencing as a result of climate change. And the zoonotic diseases that are threatening to be worse than COVID-19 don't seem to be generating from the region. So one of the unique features about the Caribbean is that we are inordinately vulnerable to factors outside of the region that are going to impact upon us in ways that other regions in which it is generated are not.
So Richard, I want to come back to that, but there's something else you said just now that makes me think. You talked about, the education system, and is it creating citizens basically? And I think maybe because of where I sit and where probably Kellie sits, and both of us working in arts organizations, that, look at what's going on around the world now. We've spent years pushing science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and trying to get more young women to enter those fields, and that's all very important. But we now have all of these basically Philistines running Silicon Valley and associated industries. Please, feel free to clap. And that kind of knowledge is very important. It drives scientific advancement, medical advancement, all of that. But teaching you how to be a human being, well, we have something called the humanities that's supposed to teach us to do that. And the humanities, the arts, the creativity is very much implicated in that. Kellie, not in your current role at the CCF, but previously you've worked a lot with young people in Jamaica. And, it's not to say that art is always about education. Yes, you can produce art or consume art, read a book for pleasure, but it is part of the way we learn about the world is through artworks. So what would you say to that?
Well, Richard is giving me PTSD because prior to the Culture Fund, I spent 10 years in peace and security. And so part of the challenge, I want to go back to what you said earlier. You asked what the biggest threats to home is, and for me, it's social and economic inequity, which is across the Caribbean rampant. And until we address that, none of the advances that we want to see in education, none of the advances that we want to see across the board are going to be real, because home is always going to be a place that works for some of us, not all of us. But to go back to my peace and security days, the access to education in the arts is one of the most powerful youth transformation levers that you have. It is often the cheapest. It is often the easiest to implement. Roberta made the point about the investments that we make in the plant and the facilities. That is less important than the quality of the educational interaction, which there's research up the wazoo about how far you can go in terms of getting children with adverse childhood experiences to express themselves through use of the arts, using the arts for educational transformation across all disciplines. So the short answer is yes, more, please, now.
Yeah. And I want to give a shout out for, just because it was recently published, if I'm not misinformed, Lloyd Best, years ago, wrote an essay called Not Pan in Schools, but School in Pan. Have I got the title right? Basically saying that, there was a Pan in Schools project of the Ministry of Education at one point, take pans into school. But he said, no, it's the opposite way around. Don't put pan in school, put the kids in the pan yards, because they don't just learn about music. You learn about relationships, you learn about negotiation, you learn how to learn, basically. And that's recently been republished as a pamphlet by the Lloyd Best Institute of the West Indies. But there are two things. There's something you talked about, those generative factors, Richard, and the fact that we don't produce them here in the Caribbean. And Kellie, you talked about, the thing is, the education system, our societies work for some of us and not all of us, that inequality. And I'm now also thinking about inequality, not just on the scale of one society or one nation, but global inequalities, right? Because that's obviously part of it. We are clearly in a moment we read the newspapers and watch the news every day, right? We're clearly in a moment when, on a global scale, all kinds of relationships, alliances, conventions, understandings that once seemed very stable and reassuring. This is how the world works. These are the checks and balances to keep us all safe. Those things are rapidly changing, disappearing, being reconfigured. And from a Caribbean historical perspective, of course, we know perfectly well, we know literally in our bodies, in our flesh and bones, that on a global stage, not all roles are equal, right? So in theory, we tell ourselves a story that every sovereign state is equal. We all sit to the United Nations, da-da-da-da-da. But very obviously, small states, vulnerable states like ours, are in most ways at the mercy of bigger, richer states with big armies, stronger currencies, and, you know. So to bring this back to the idea of home, so if on a global scale planet Earth is a home, we are not all equal residents in that home as states, much less as citizens. Here in the Caribbean, we don't have huge armies. We don't have the power to, you know, impose world-shaking trade tariffs. But I want to ask the three of you, what we do have, what do we have? What are the resources that our small island states currently have or could potentially have in the near future that would allow us to maybe not have equal power and equal strength with, you know, the big superpowers, if we still use that term anymore, mostly to the north? What do we have that can help us counteract those vulnerabilities? What do you think? Richard is laughing. Maybe there's nothing. What do you think, Richard?
I'm laughing because I think that, you know, so how did we arrive here? We arrived here because after the Second World War, essentially, there was a system by which the world realized in order for us to not experience anything like that again, we are going to have to restructure what the global order looks like. And in that process, realms realized that there was a need to distance yourself from expensive colonies. That was because if it's part of your realm, you have to pay for its security, right? And you have to pay for its development. So we were essentially born out of a movement to create a more stable global order, global stage. Now, what happened in the process? We inherited or we experienced a level of political sovereignty as sovereign states in the geopolitical order of the world. But the structure of vulnerability increased in many ways, in part in real terms, but also in the expectations of sovereignty. Because when you're a sovereign state, the big idea that you are places certain guarantees to its citizenry. When you're not a sovereign state, the idea of who you are is the responsibility of somebody else from somewhere else, right? So part of that is the evolution of responsibility for ourselves and our sovereignty. And the other side of that coin is the capacity to realize those expectations. Now, if we look at it through those two lenses, you realize that there are indeed, in my mind, some geopolitical sovereign arrangements that in and of themselves do not have the capacity to realize the full idea of sovereignty. And so what do we do about that? Right here in Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, there's talk of autonomy on one side, one island. But what is the impact of sovereignty in relation to autonomy? And how do we guarantee the expectations of the citizenry within that type of arrangement? Right? And so you quoted Lloyd Best earlier on, and I fully agree with him. Our advantage here in the region cannot be militarily, cannot be economic, but it is certainly intellectual, certainly creative. But we cannot play by the traditional industry rules that was established almost 100 years ago to satisfy other people's interests and competitive advantage. we have to do more than develop our industries. We have to change the nature of trade. We have to change the nature of what we export as a product of who we are as a people. And quite frankly, it's one of the reasons why I'm very interested in what's happening here. I mean, I come from a different world. I come from a policy advising world to governments. So to understand this is very important for me, because what I'm going to say here might sound a bit controversial, but I think it's important to be said. When you look at the skill sets of the people who are sitting making policies in this country or in the region, it's built on a formal skill set and training that might not be as comprehensive as is required to be able to move the development along a certain line. We need more artists, we need more visionaries, we need more engineers in our parliaments. It is too dominated by attorneys who are trained for the consistency of decisions made in the past through case laws. I am not suggesting that they are not visionary attorneys. Please don't.
I know one or two. I have some lawyer friends.
Okay? But the point I'm making is our policy making space should be more representative of the diversity of our capacity to define what development means for us and to pursue it. Yeah?
Kelly, you think we should have a quota for artists and writers in Parliament?
Yes. But to tie what Richard was saying back to Roberta's earlier point, we have an education system that's training young people for a world that no longer exists, and a political and economic model that has never suited us, and it doesn't make sense. I mean, the Caribbean has always punched above our weight class in terms of intellectual attainment and creative attainment, but we've never directed investment into the arts proportionate to its potential. And so if your question is, what do we have, both in terms of our ability to wield soft power globally and to monetize it, it's the arts. I mean, it's a little facetious that you're asking that question on the Boca stage, because I think it's screamingly obvious. We just need policy to align with what we already know.
Yeah, and that's something Marina mentioned last night at the Central Bank, that she used the very phrase, soft power. Roberta, you wanted to?
Yeah, you asked, what do we have? And I suppose as I'm getting older, I'm a lot more, generous and accepting of politicians, whether lawyers or not. When you think of what we inherited, and I'm born in 1960, so I'm a child of the 60s. You think of what we inherited, a region with hardly any secondary schools, maybe some primary schools, the majority of children not in school, very little public housing, no access to secondary health care, maybe some basic primary health care. These people were in this region extracting for centuries and not doing any investment. So to the extent that we have what we have, this is a product of what we have done. And I think we have to honor that. We have to honor that recent past for sure. Not only to honor it, but to say what is possible in the future, because we are the possibles. And that's what we have. We have us. We have, yes, the talents, the creativity, but that creativity, that intellectualism, and I don't say that in an elitist way. When I say intellectualism, thinking, acting on evidence, having policy related to evidence, that we have to insist on. And yes, we have to insist on it by having policymakers who represent all of the skill sets that we need. But I think we have the people, we have nature, we have a lot of it, we have land. So much of our land in the Caribbean is unutilized. And we're importing 80% of our food. How is that possible? All of us have sunshine. How many hours of the day? At least 12. And we're importing fuel like nothing. All of our foreign exchange is going in food and fuel, where we can generate a lot of that here in the region. So I think we have to think about that. And you know, Eric Williams famously said, such a clever way, when Jamaica left the Federation, 1 from 10 is 0. Isn't that clever? He was a poet as well, right? But Mia Motley...
Calypsonian.
Yeah, Calypsonian. Mia Motley said this year, and I like her math as well. 1 times 15, and she's thinking about the CARICOM, 1 times 15 is 1. What she's saying that we have to be unified because together we have enough to answer some of these existential, I would put realities. Yes, a lot of these shocks are external, the macroeconomic shocks, the climate shocks, but we have enough here that we can put it together and address some of that, mitigate some of that threats of damage that we have. I'm very optimistic about it, but young people have to be involved and we have to make sure that they have the skill sets to be involved and to be part of that solution for their own future.
So you mentioned CARICOM there, and I want to actually kind of ask you something related to that, slight change of direction, because Richard also mentioned, the sovereign entities, sovereign states, the power that an individual sovereign state has within its borders as opposed to what its neighbors have. And so it brings me to the idea of community in the sense that CARICOM is a community. It's literally the Caribbean community. You are with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. It's an organ of the OAS. The OAS is supposed to be a community, a hemispheric community. And I think built into that idea of a community is having mutual interests, right? Yeah. Now, in a physical neighborhood, if your neighbor's house catches fire, you have a mutual interest in putting it out because the fire will spread probably to yours. But in terms of your everyday field, human rights, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? And at what point do we think about maybe not compromising, but impinging on our neighbor's sovereignty in the interest of mutual security, mutual stability, or just keeping its citizens safe? I mean, what should, to make it very, very practical and ask a big question none of us can answer, what should the rest of the Caribbean, for instance, be doing about Haiti?
Yeah. I mean, sovereignty really is about the non-interference in the internal affairs of nation states, right? So that's an obligation that all states have not to be involved. But there's one exception to that, one exception accepted in international law, which is where human rights are being violated, patterns, systemic violations of human rights, widespread violations of human rights. The international community has an obligation to step in because, of course, it's a universal obligation. And it's not just from the point of view of self-interest. I think it starts off with just being concerned that someone else and other people are facing harm. But of course, when they face harm, people will leave that place as they did Venezuela. How many? 8 million Venezuelans have left Venezuela, most of them on Colombia, trying to get through the Darien, Panama, up to get somewhere. A lot of them here are in Trinidad and Tobago because people will look for security and they will leave where they are. So I think two things here. One, to be concerned about violations of human rights in other countries is an obligation of all of us. We can't turn away from it. We can't say it's not our business because everyone is entitled to the dignified life. And to the extent that you have political or policy options to say something, at least say something. We can't go and, we don't have military, we're not going to stage an intervention in any of these countries, but we do have the authority of the integrity of the voice of democracy and rule of law. And when we don't use that, aren't we failing our neighbors? Aren't we? We can't look away from it. As difficult as it is geopolitically, we have to say what we see. If the election results still you don't have a ballot count, have you had a free and fair election? Do we not have some obligation to think that through? So that's one thing, being sufficiently interested to call out diplomatically or otherwise what is happening, where there are violations, and then to support people who are fleeing, either they're fleeing persecution or they're fleeing economic distress, extreme economic distress, or as in the case of Haiti now, a complete breakdown of the state. The state has completely broken down. So Haitians are leaving. What is the obligation of CARICOM? It's a hard question because we too have absorptive limitations. And the crisis is so systemic and whole and widespread and far-reaching. Again, Prime Minister Motley is saying we have an obligation more than saying elections will be held. We have an obligation to press the international community to do the reparations which Haiti is entitled to, but also, and it's connected to reparations, to ensure that there's some basic provisioning for the kinds of social provisioning that we now are accustomed to, basic education, basic healthcare, basic social security, and we have to be insisting that that's part of the development plan for Haiti, even as the politics, as we seek to support them in calming down the politics and having free and fair elections at the end of this year. But of course, how do you deal, Richard, with the organized gangs there that are now controlling whole geographies of Haiti? Big problem.
So Richard, before you answer that, I want to throw something else in, not being too mischievous, but so yes, that moral obligation, maybe even an ideological obligation to step in when one of our neighbors is in trouble. What happens when, let us say, a close neighbor of the Caribbean gets invaded by an unnamed country somewhere else? Let's say there was a country on the Central American Isthmus that got invaded for some reason that we can't possibly imagine. CARICOM doesn't have armies to send in. Or what happens if a neighbor to the south, there's a boundary dispute and an army crosses the boundary and there are mineral rights? So again, I'm totally hypothetical, right? I have a very literary imagination. I'm imagining all of these scenarios. In a case like that, Richard, you are the security expert. If the Prime Minister calls you up and says, I need advice, what do we do? With our small size, no armies, limited economic power, we may have our voice. Apart from speaking out and facing the repercussions of speaking out, what do we have and what could we do?
Well, first of all, defining the problem is extremely important. The problem of Haiti was not created essentially in the region, right? So there's not likely to be a regional autonomous solution to Haiti, because the problem that is Haiti, not Haiti is the problem. Huh? The problem that is Haiti, not the problem that is in Haiti. The problem that is Haiti is an international problem. That's very, very important, because the problem that is Haiti will require an international solution. So let's look at this scenario. There is an assortment of gangs in Haiti that runs, we estimate, roughly 3,000 to 4,000 people. Gangs. They are now trafficking arms and ammunition out of Haiti to other countries. So let's set the stage. You have a country in a failed state arrangement. By the way, the international community's approach to Haiti is similar to sub-Saharan African failed states' approach. Yet, geographically, it exists in the Caribbean. So one needs to ask, why is a country like Haiti in the Caribbean being approached in the same way that we have approached sub-Saharan African failed states arrangement?
Toussaint was a mighty man, but to make matters worse, he was black.
So we have a situation where the country is run by gangs. Whatever levels of goods and services that are being made available, the gangs control the ports, they control whatever version of healthcare. There's absolutely no education, there's no judicial system. All of that has fallen down. What we do know is that, as in any failed states arrangement, you need an international force that goes in there and provides the level of stability to rebuild the institutions of governance that will give the opportunity for sustainable security and safety to work. All right? But the CARICOM, or most developing countries, do not have the military capacity to sustain that kind of security in a failed state on our own. We cannot. We don't have the capacity. So here's the reality. My estimate, and I've advised on these things, it is not going to take anything less than 15 years to build the institution in a security arrangement. Education, healthcare, a judiciary, the prosecution of those who created this circumstance, in order to give Haiti the opportunity to set the foundation to be sustainable. Now there have been lessons learned, Iraq, Afghanistan, and a couple of others. If you don't get that formula right, the minute the security forces leave the country, it quickly diverts back into what it was before. So there's a level of international commitment to Haiti that must be commensurate with centuries of structural violence and a poor system of supporting a sustainable Haiti that has to be treated with. Now, the problem is the current geopolitical environment is not multilateral enough to support that kind of intervention in Haiti. In fact, what we are seeing on the global stage is big countries are looking inward, not to your neighbor, unless the activities of the neighbor renders other countries vulnerable. So that you will see different interventions being advocated for. So some countries say, look, we have the money to fund it, but we're not going in there. We're not sending troops in there because it's not consistent with their domestic politics. So I hate to further create complexity, but the reality is you can't undo hundreds of years of this kind of arrangement we have to define the problem far more complex than that.
Absolutely. But I want to, well, you were going to, sorry, Kellie, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that there can be no meaningful long-term solution in Haiti without the active participation of the people who are still in Haiti. Everybody has not left Haiti. There are still people there who are fighting. The Caribbean Culture Fund's principles are based in Haiti, and I think there needs to be a balance between marshalling international support and actively supporting people who are still on the ground, still working for good in Haiti. And that's all I will add there. But I think you were going to move to a question about
No, I actually wanted
culture.
to ask you something that kind of followed up on this, because I'm listening to what Richard is saying. And so you can, in a case like this, let's say, you can make a political argument, you can make a human rights argument, you can make an economic argument, you can make all kinds of arguments.
A historical argument.
Making these but at some point, does this really work if you can't make an emotional argument? And I think that's where we come back to arts and culture, because that is where you need to tell the story. Someone needs to tell the story that convinces everybody, yes, we have to intervene, yes, we have to help, not just in the case of Haiti, but anywhere else. And so you as an arts funder and policy maker, where do you draw the line between just funding art because it's good, art for art's sake, creativity in any form, and trying to sort of use the resources you have to set an agenda and to push things in a certain direction? I mean, there's always a political element to art. It is not to say that we're only funding novels this year that convince us to intervene in Haiti. I'm not saying that, but there are things that we do. The kinds of books that we platform here at the festival, that affects what people know, what people think, what people imagine. I mean, in a very practical way, this is the only example, the first example that came to mind, but I think it's a legitimate one. One of the things that they say made Ronald Reagan decide he finally needed to sit down and talk to Russia was a movie. It was a film. I think it was called The Day After or The Day After Tomorrow or something like that. And it was broadcast on TV in the US back in the early 80s, and it depicted the aftermath of a nuclear attack, and it was horrifying. And Reagan apparently saw that and was shaken to his core, and that directly led to him saying, I need to start talking to the Soviets. So, I mean, that's an example from somewhere else, and maybe an extreme one, but works of art,
I
films,
think it's a
books.
really practical example. I mean, I think for us it's a balance between trying to run the fund with an equity lens and then trying to do what we think is morally appropriate. So I said in the beginning that we fund on a rotating basis. We pick 5 to 6 countries each call. Haiti was in our first call. We're about to put out our third call. We're putting Haiti back in the call again because we recognize that the artists there are under unimaginable circumstances, and we feel that prioritizing their voices is the morally right thing to do. So when the call comes out, the people from the countries that are not in call, please don't cuss me. Please remember that this is why we're doing it, because we have to try to do what is right. And I think that the principles of the fund have a profound belief in the power of arts to catalyze change in the way people think primarily, even if we can't change the way societies are structured or the way laws are shaped or the way gangs behave, but we can change people's minds. And so that is the reason that we are going to try as much as possible to support Haitian creatives.
Yeah. I think you are onto something there, Nicholas, about the storytelling, and I wanted to ask the audience, how many of us are aware of what's massacres that are happening in Haiti now? We're not talking about one person being killed here and one person being killed there. In any one moment in a community, 62, 80, 95 people killed in one day.
1,600 in the last 3 months.
Yes. And so these are, it's beyond what we reasonably can imagine, but do we know? Do we have that story? Are we living with that story every day? And I think if we could get that, the texture of the lives of Haitian people, talking about extreme insecurity doesn't even do justice to what they're experiencing. To talk about the sexual violence, rapes of women and girls, that's also happening, trafficking in people. But the story has to be told in a way that we can understand it and that we can say, we have a responsibility to do something. And if that something is just making the demand of the international community, I think that's what we have to do. And yes, Haitians are telling us, don't just send in multinational forces like you did last time, MINUSTA or UN structures. We, as Kellie said, we want to be the authors of our fate, and we don't want you to impose on us political leaders who are part of the problem. So I think it's for us to really understand as co-citizens of this region what is happening to Haiti so we can make the demands on our governments as to the pressure that they put in international community for a response that does, yes, build the governance foundation that Haitians need now.
I feel there must be some questions in the audience. And would anyone like to ask one? We've got a microphone. I see a hand coming up. So where's the mic? So yes, gentleman right there. Good afternoon.
Good evening to the panel.
Good afternoon.
My analysis of Haiti is like Haiti was a premature birth in terms of its independence. And yes, the issues of Haiti is real, but nobody's holding the people of Haiti and their leaders accountable. You go back from Dessalines, Toussaint, even Jovenel Moïse that was murdered. His own wife played a part in his assassination. So it's that, what was the main gang leader, Barbecue? How come they cannot arrest this man, put him on trial, and if he's found not guilty, give him a gold medal? Or if he's guilty, have him executed? It's time the people of Haiti take responsibility for themselves. I mean, I'm not part of the panel and we don't want to take up the whole thing. They need help, but how do we organize this help? We want this. No, we don't want that. Haiti, I don't know if by now, is not a signatory of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which would make them a full-fledged member of CARICOM. Who's to blame? Us?
Yes, we're getting some disagreements up here. I would just say that the French president finally, a couple of weeks ago, stood up and said, he didn't say, I'm writing you the check, but he did say, yeah, we were wrong. So I think that the hundreds and hundreds and billions, if not trillions of dollars that could have been available to Haiti, had they not paid those reparations to the French state, might have given us a different scenario in the present. However, other gentlemen in the cap.
Hi, my name is Derek, and I just wanted to take issue. Would you see in the future if, the Caribbean countries would come all together and either have their own currency, that you would just be more vulnerable to U.S. using maybe Haiti to destabilize the region. Just like in the 80s and 90s, we kind of seen the US pick one country bit by bit and destabilize the region. And you were talking about the Middle East before, about Iraq and Syria. And I worked there for 2 years working in agriculture work, and it just seems like it's been a destabilizing for years and years from the US, and just meddling in everyone's domestic problems and trying to create wedges in their countries. So in terms of security, or if you guys do become maybe a regional power, you can't be a great power, because that would just be, you're too small and you don't have enough resources. But yeah, I'll let that up to you.
Well, I think we're moving towards a multipolar world that regional blocs are going to have to figure out how are we going to operate in this new global arrangement, all right? If you look at some of the other regional arrangements, the ASEAN group, if you look at the BRICS, if you look at the European Union, there's an integration of political, economic, and defense arrangements. They are expediting that kind of regional bloc centered around strong economic interdependency, political coherence in terms of how they treat with extra-regional issues. It's happening. It's happening. And so I don't think CARICOM has much of a choice if we want to operate within the new global arrangement than to strengthen around similar interdependent strands. Now, that's predicated on the fact that, in my opinion, the movement and the instability that we are seeing across the world in international relations, there is an expedited vulnerability for small states, particularly small island developing states. And so what appeared to be a good thing to do, a progressive thing to do, I think we are moving towards the criticality of necessity if we are to retain some level of sovereignty that we enjoyed as individuals as well as a CARICOM community.
Well, and also to say that we forget that maybe more than half of what we consider to be CARICOM share currency, share all the institutions, share the OECS, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, they share currency, they share central bank, they share pharmaceutical procurement, they share a court. There are they are really functionally integrated in the way in which the so-called bigger islands are not. So we know that it's a model for strength. Are we going to erase all of the existential vulnerabilities? Of course not. But what we're trying to do is mitigate some of those vulnerabilities and grow out some strength, grow out some resilience, right? Accepting there's some things that are external to us that we can't control, but to the extent that we can, we do. Food production, that's one big thing that we can do more of. So I think that thinking about integration is important. It won't solve all of the problems, but more is better than few. You know, unity is better than isolation, for sure.
We can maybe have one more audience question, but first, we've been talking a lot about community and care, so here's a caring announcement. If your car is PEA 1350, the parking lot you're parked in is about to close. So PEA 1350, if you're in the room, you need to run and move your car. We don't want you to get impounded tonight. All right, we have a lot of questions, but I think the lady in the pink was the first hand I saw.
Good afternoon. The idea of home, I'm wondering if we can sort of relate it to being patriotic of our individual and maybe, you know, together, if we are truly patriotic to our own, as a Caribbean coming together, we can be great. And thinking, even looking at Trinidad here, I think a lack of patriotism to your homeland could help to depreciate the way we look and appreciate our own space, you know. And I think education-wise, we maybe have to look at educating our younger ones. I know some of the Caribbean, because I lived in Grenada for a while, my parents are from there, and they are very patriotic to their country. I know Jamaicans are, and we have a few. But somehow I'm thinking, I'm looking at here in Trinidad, that I'm associating that patriotism should be able to be connected to a lot of being home, you know, homebound, and having that love and building from there. And if we can go back to teaching our children, maybe from primary school upwards, we can have stronger societies, not only Trinidad, but even across the Caribbean, so that we can come together as well.
Thank you. I think what I'll do is maybe we'll let a couple other people ask questions and we could try to reply. But I will just say to that, last night we had a tribute to Earl Lovelace for his 90th birthday. And I realized sitting in the audience, there are some sentences in Earl Lovelace's novel that for me are home. If I hear that sentence, it's like I start to choke up like I'm hearing the national anthem, almost. Again, so, Kelly and I could have this conversation and be preacher and choir all in one. So, Berkeley, and then we'll come to you. And let's get this one here, question, and then this one, and then we'll try to answer right up in front. And then yours, and then we'll see if we can answer those three in one.
Thank you. Just one question, sir. Does Haiti manufacture weapons? So that is an external issue, isn't it? Yeah. And I think that's the question we want to pay attention to, that what's happening in Haiti is not always what's internal, the problem there, seems to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, and then this gentleman here.
Hello, Gerard Hosier. One of the things that is undervalued, you're looking for value to the Caribbean, is the diaspora. There's a soft power in that. Many countries use it. Ireland is very good at that. Britain is very good at that. It's exporting their soft power, their cultural power, their influence, directly, indirectly, in people working in media, in the creative arts overseas, and also bringing income into the country. The Philippines' economy is based on that. And none of that is valued or encouraged or even harnessed. And I think, it really is, I think it's a waste of a natural asset, So I just would like, thought about, and also just one other thing with that, the feeling of home. Sometimes the diaspora is not valued back here. They're very much othered and patronized.
Kelly, you want to answer that one first?
Because I think that it's not valued. I mean, in Jamaica, for instance, our contributions from outside of the country are our biggest contributor to GDP. So we very much know the value of our diaspora. The challenge is in formalizing our philanthropic and other sources of financial investment from the diaspora to line up behind the areas that we want to prioritize. So right now it happens, but it's not planned, it's a bit informal. There needs to be a much more structured effort at directing that investment to the areas that we want to grow in and that we realize will make us more competitive globally. And I think the same is true across the Caribbean. There's a lot more that we can do. I'm glad Roberta brought it back to co-production, because that's, for me that's more related to the question of home and optimism than the security issues that are a bit more knotty. But there's much more that we can do in terms of catalyzing regional collaboration, trying to find out where we have synergies, which countries are better at certain things, which countries are better than others, where we let certain countries lead. So I think there's a lot more investment and analysis that we can do around collaborative initiatives in the creative sector.
I want to say something about the diaspora, and yes, thanks for the remembrance that remittance is a big thing from Caribbean diaspora communities. I think in a way, sometimes our dialogue around the diaspora is about an extraction. And I think we have to move away from that model, like Kelly is agreeing. How do you create a real connectivity between diaspora and the Caribbean? We keep talking about brain drain. Young people will leave, they'll leave for opportunity. And that's just the global reality now. But can we create mechanisms for them, sort of pathways, conduits for them to contribute back to the countries that they come from? I don't know if there's any country that has done that. How do you give back to a country that you don't intend to live in anymore in any long-term way, but you understand that you can have a contribution to make, but more than that, that you may have an obligation to make that contribution because the Caribbean taxpayer has created the possibility for you to have this foundation, to do all the things that you're doing elsewhere. But I think we have to start thinking about how, and people in diaspora want to give back, not just money. They want to give back emotionally, they want to give back psychologically, they just want to be part of this community that they feel connected to and romantic about, yeah. And I think we have to start thinking about what kinds of ways in which we can have structured connectivity, which is not just about remittances.
I just want to talk, but I'm mindful that there were two other questions we need to treat with, but this diaspora issue is big. A couple of years ago, Sir Hilary Beckles was trying to articulate an approach to Africa, and he was saying that the time in international relations has moved on from continental and diaspora, core and periphery, and this is the period for global Africa. It's the same concept of one China, right? There is a globalization of the identity that should set the conditions for how we relate to persons of a particular grouping or collective. Doesn't matter where they are in the world. So one of my colleagues said earlier on, wherever a particular family member of mine is home for me, right? Wherever a Caribbean person is geographically, they are Caribbean, right? And that's the movement. Now, you did mention a couple of other countries that seems to be far more nationalistic, and the way they export that or identify with that wherever they are in the world. Trinidad and Tobago is a very unique experiment. There was a period where we had Spanish laws, French plantocracy, indigenous peoples, British buildings, indentured laborers, and a relatively short period of African slave labor, all operating in the same space, more so in Trinidad and in Tobago. I don't think we have appropriated all of that in governance in the ways that perhaps it is being expressed in the arts. So I see Spanish, French, I see indigenous, I see African, I see Indian, I see Chinese. You see it in the expression of art called Caribbean, right? The question is, how do we express that in other areas of the quality of our lives to the distinction that we could identify it in ourselves no matter where in the world we are? And there are artists who are pioneering that kind of identity. One of them is sitting in the room here, but I wouldn't call him out specifically. But no, I wouldn't. Yes. Yes, Robert, if they call your name, it's not me, they just said it. But there are pioneers of persons who are trying to understand the uniqueness of what it is to be Caribbean and express it, right? And that to me is an important way in which we advance the big idea that is Caribbean.
Okay.
Maybe something about patriotism.
There was a question about patriotism.
I don't know, because we don't want to miss that question. I just think it's a great idea, patriotism. We're not talking about kind of xenophobic arrogance, right? But the kind of impulse that comes with connection to your country and a sense that you owe it something. You owe it loyalty, you owe it your best citizenship. And I think that's something that we need I think we have it, but how do we kind of harness it to intentionally for an outcome that we all agree that we need the common ground. But I think patriotism is a real great idea. But to define it in a way that you are, the way in which you use the word, I think that we need that definition.
But to take off on what I was saying, I've just been thinking about this. I have never got a tear in my eye hearing the national anthem or looking at the flag, but I have many times cried reading a book or a favorite poem or a line, and I just think, this explains something about my place in the world to me. So again, no surprise, making an argument for the role of artists, of writers. There are Martin Carter poems. If you recite one line for me, I'll be in tears. David Rudder Calypsos. I cannot see TV footage of one of Minshall's bands of River crossing the stage at the Savannah and not have tears running down my face. I'm getting choked up talking about it. We are almost out of time. We did start late, so we've allowed ourselves to run a little late. I'm going to let Paula ask her last question, and then we're going to wrap up. I know this conversation could go on for a long time, but let's get Paula here, and then we will bring this... Okay, sure. One more, and then Paula, and then we will... Yeah? Okay.
Hi, everyone. This might be a big question to ask at the end of this. My question was about the idea of reform in relation to a system that we've inherited. I just wonder if we can achieve... Oh, yeah, I can stand up. Sorry. I just wonder if we can achieve what we're all talking about, which is, I think encompassed by a sense of dignity and self-autonomy without separating ourselves from this system that we've inherited. I think that sometimes reform works to reinforce an economic system or a political system. So I just want to ask if you think that reform is the way to think about our problems or solving our problems, or you think that there's a more expansive way to think about the way we govern ourselves or our economic system.
Yeah, so you're thinking about political reform, constitutional reform, is that what you mean?
About education, and that we've inherited an educational system that is modeled after a British system. By reforming that, we kind of still play into the scaffolding of a British system. So is reform the way to go when we've inherited a system that naturally or inherently extracts from us or is built to extract from us, or do we have to find a different way of organizing ourselves?
Yeah, and I would just say reform can happen in all kinds of ways, right? And 60 or 70 years ago, a Caribbean writer writing a novel about the Caribbean would either have to write it in standard English or provide a glossary. Naipaul had to define a roti in one of his novels as a kind of flat pancake because his editor said, who will know what it is? So that is a kind of a reform. The fact that our writers now can write in their own language, their own vocabulary, not feel obliged to explain it. So that's just in one very small, narrow area.
Yeah, I would just not, both because I'm a cockeyed optimist and because I work for the Culture Fund, I have much more optimism about the arts catalyzing reform at the individual human level than systemic reform. I will leave it to the security experts and human rights experts to drive the latter, but I said at the beginning, home is where my mother is. Yeah. For me, home is also where your money is. So if you care about home, put some money in the arts because that is what is going to drive change. Yeah.
That's what you call a PSA. I would say about reform, maybe it's semantics. If you're using the word reform as a way of talking about tinkering on the edges of the problem, yes, you're right. But if we think about reform as a transformation, where you're addressing the root causes of the problem that you're seeing, then that's what we're going for here. Whether we call it reform or transformation or revolution, what we need is to do the proper analysis. What are the root causes of the things that we're seeing that are so problematic for undermining development and human rights and peace and security in our region? That's what we have to go for.
I think you've asked a very important question. I agree with my colleagues, but I want to give you an example. So there was a hurricane in Haiti some years ago, and I was part of the deliberations as to what the construct of the intervention in Haiti would be. And back then, an international coalition of militaries went into Haiti, but there was no pre-testing for cholera or any of the transmittable diseases. Because Haiti is such an isolated place, they had no natural resistance to cholera. So the international forces went in there. And when we did the post-briefing, a few years later, more Haitians died of cholera than those who died in the earthquake. Sorry. So the question is, did we achieve the objective of this humanitarian initiative? The answer is no, because our intervention cost more lives than saved lives. And that caused a restructuring to the point where it is now a policy for pre-testing before deployment into vulnerable societies like Haiti. So the entire structure had to be redone or reformed because of the lessons that was learned out of operating on a previous system that was not in the best interest of the strategic outcome. So very good observation. Yeah.
Paula, finally you get to ask your question.
Hi, good day, Paula Lindo. It was when we were talking about definitions of home, I have two homes, because like many Caribbean people, I am from 2 islands. And so, especially for me, in one island, I am perceived as belonging to the other island. So I'm not quite Jamaican enough for the Jamaicans and not Trinidadian enough for the Trinidadians. And so I think having an integrated CARICOM body would help some of us feel more like we're at home. And I'm choking up and I don't know why. But yes, I think that also appeals to diaspora, because as someone said, they're looked down upon in some ways because the connection they have to home is not from being here. It's to their parents. And their parents were the ones who didn't have the opportunities. So they run away and they give their children this warped perception of what the Caribbean is like. So I think, having that integration is something that will really help us be a power.
All right, so many of these questions that we've talked about in different terms and in different kinds of language, from a technical point of view, from an emotional point of view, these are all running through the books that our festival writers are writing. So we are going to have 2 more full days of the festival and opportunities to talk and think about these things through the lenses of the novels, the poems, the memoirs, the books of history, everything else that's part of the Bocas Lit Fest. And because we're a literary festival, I want to end by asking, not a literary question, but I want to ask a question about books. An easy question, that's also not an easy question, of each of you. I just want to ask each of you, what book or poem or short story or song, song lyrics are also part of literature, brings you home? You hear that or you read it or I'm back home. Kelly.
I have to pick 2. One is Anything by Lorna Goodison, because I think her familial relationships remind me of why I am still fiercely proud to be Jamaican and love living here. And just to say, I've been back in Jamaica 20 years and I'm still not Jamaican enough for them, so go, you never win. And then for me, the second would be In the Humor of Anthony Winkler, because part of why I still live in Jamaica is I laugh every day. I laugh through hardship, I laugh through pain, I laugh every day, and Winkler's humor is quintessentially Jamaican.
Richard?
For me, it would be Michael Anthony's Green Days by the River. And the reason for that is a 15-year-old city boy who, for economic reasons, hardship, and his ill father, went to this place in Mayaro, this village, fictional village. And that's important for me because as a boy, I traversed between the city and the village, the rural life, with my grandmother. And I find commonality in the way this 15-year-old boy, in his own narrative, was trying to make sense of the complexity of his world and what's happening around him. I am Shelley. I am still a little boy from Movant that traveled around the world, born in Laventille, making sense of the complexity of it all. And similar to Shelley, I say this all the time. Growing up in Movant in the 70s and the 80s, I didn't know I was poor, and I didn't know I was stigmatized. I didn't know any of that because we had all things in common. And the way we enjoyed, we were happy, right? It's only when I came out of that space of commonality and in touch with nature and going and bathe in the river and waiting to dry your clothes on the rocks because you're going home to get licks. It's when I left that and came out to face the world, I realized, wait, there's a context within which I should reach to or aspire to be because of the geography in which my parents decide to have me. But by that time, Movant had done enough to consolidate who I was to not buy into that narrative. So Shelley and I have a lot in common, right? Because I try to be as introspective enough and aware of my environment to make sense of the complexity of the world that I'm in. And so I'm Shelley. Yeah.
I just want to remember how much I like Winkler. And the most surprising sentence I've ever read from a Caribbean novelist was in this book. What is his biggest one? The Lunatic? The Lunatic, where he says, she give way pum pum like grieving I give way water. And then I could never imagine reading this in a book anywhere. Yeah, so that stayed with me. The book for me, for the purposes of this, is a book actually by a Barbadian, a daughter of a Barbadian family, Paul Marshall. And she wrote this book, Brown Girls, Brown Stones, in 1959. And it was one of the first books I read as an older teenager. And it really is a book about an immigrant family, a Barbadian family going and the mother trying to make home. She's trying to make New York home by doing the thing that is the American dream, buying a brownstone. Meanwhile, the father, who is dissolute and frivolous and a cheater, he just wants to go back home. He wants to go back to Barbados. That's his dream, that's his romance. And so, just to say, he has a piece of land in Barbados, and the mother finds ways to fraudulently to get the land sold so that she could get that money in New York to buy the brownstone. But guess what? He gets his hands on the money before she gets it, and he buys gifts and he wastes the money. And so it's all about the tension between trying to make a home somewhere else and the romance of wanting to go back. But it's also very much about the triple invisibility that she suffers as gender, as a foreigner, as a black woman, and the tension with her daughter, who doesn't understand why she's so harsh, why she's so resolute, why she doesn't buy into the romance of the father and going back home. So for this purpose, I really, and I recommend the book. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. And because I asked you that unfair question to choose one book, I'm going to try to answer it myself because I didn't do you any favors by, the book for me probably changes day by day, year by year, even hour by hour, but I think consistently a writer I come back to who makes me feel at home, not necessarily in a geographical sense, but in an intellectual sense, in a sense of being a way of thinking, being understood, and a kind of idealism of ideology is Martin Carter. I think there's an essay by Martin Carter called A Free Community of Valid Persons, and if there's one thing I could make every university student in the Caribbean read, the essay is only 3 pages long, I would make them read that. There's a poem in Martin, one of my favorite Carter poem, it's called Proem, and I've said more than once that if I heard the planet was exploding and I had to get in a rocket ship to escape, and they said I could take one text with me, it would probably be that. So that's my answer, the poems of Martin Carter. Before I ask you to applaud them, I want to just say a couple of things. We're done here for the day at the National Library and Old Fire Station. We are not done for the festival today. We have another event at 7 p.m., which is just now because we ran over time, at the Big Black Box in Woodbrook, where we're going to be celebrating 15 years of the OCM Bocas Prize with a wonderful evening of dramatized readings and music from past prize-winning books. So I hope we'll see you all there at the Big Black Box. If you can't make it, we're back in here in this very room, 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. We are kicking off with a bang. We've got Una Broadband. I think we should all bow or genuflect. We've got the amazing Jamaican author Una Broadband tomorrow morning on stage with another amazing younger Jamaican writer, Jason Allen Payzant. They're going to be in conversation. And then it's straight through for the whole day and straight there all through on Sunday. So I hope we're going to see you tomorrow. I hope we're going to see you on Sunday. Maybe we'll see you tonight. I want to say a very, very heartfelt thanks to the panel. I'm leaving with a lot of stuff to think about. Please applaud them. And audience, please applaud yourselves for staying here for 2 hours and having such interesting questions. Thanks very much, everyone. Get home safely, and I hope we see you on the weekend.